So let me share my screen here. All right. So today we're really going to be talking about the role of the fashion magazine in our industry, and kind of going to be looking at how it's progressed over time, its influence on women in fashion and how we perceive fashion, because fashion magazines have been a big voice for why we see fashion the way we do, and our relationship with it. And then we're going to kind of ask the question as to whether it's even, if the fashion magazine is relevant at all, and if it's been replaced by things such as Instagram. So that's why the lecture is called Vogue versus Instagram, because I think they're a bit at odds with each other, but you guys can make up your own mind. But it's really about the influence of the fashion magazine on our perceptions of fashion and how we relate to fashion, and what fashion is and what these magazines are telling us. What they are telling us, things that are important. You have to remember that a fashion magazine is not the designer. It's its own business, and it just publishes designers' work. So it's not, Vogue is not tied to Ralph Lauren. Ralph Lauren buys pages in Vogue. Vogue is its own business entity. So let's go back. So remember that fashion advertising really began with Louis and his fashion plates, and they really were the precursor to the fashion magazine. And those fashion plates that we learned that Louis started, that was really the primary way fashion was bought and sold outside of its region, from the 16th, 17th, 18th, all the way to the mid 19th century. So for hundreds of years, that is how people who weren't accessible to fashion houses and tailors were buying French fashion. For Americans, they would send over booklets of those illustrations, and then American stores could buy those styles or the patterns and have them made in America. But it was like, they were kind of like a precursor to a catalog. But the first fashion magazine in America is Harper's Bazaar, and it was first published November 2nd in 1867, I'm sorry. Harper's Bazaar is actually the oldest and the longest running fashion magazine in the world continuously. They have never not had a publication. So even during World War I, World War II, they still publish. They have not missed a publication date. The magazine was started by Marie Louise Booth, and she was really going to, it was an illustrated journal for women showing European fashion, and it was weekly. So women would get these could be bought weekly, and it really talked about European fashion, gardening, art, polite etiquette, and other sort of domestic interests. So kind of an all-encompassing idealized lifestyle for women at the time. And it was all done by illustration. And you can see these women here. These are different hairstyles with different types of bonnets. And each week a new one would come out with new ideas for women and the new and latest thing that you might want to go grab at the store in town. Booth set out to publish a journal that was to act as a resource of fashion, pleasure, and instruction for women. And in 1892, Harper's Bazaar gets some competition. Arthur Baldwin Turner founds Vogue in the US, and it provides European fashion. It's all illustrated, the same as Harper's Bazaar. But what made it different is he provided patterns to the European designs in his magazine, which made it very popular, because that meant that American women at home who couldn't afford French fashion could actually make it at home. Vogue was a weekly publication as well, and it stayed that way for its first 17 years of life. Vogue was designed to express the superiority of French fashion and culture. and it to the American clientele. So it was really going to spread the message that everything French was superior to American, and that is what it was selling. The Vogue is a French word, and it means style in French. That's what it means. It has been described as the world's most influential and successful magazine in the world, and obviously it's still in publication today as well. In 1909, Condé Nast acquired Vogue from the original founder, and Condé Nast still owns Vogue today. The first thing they decided to change about Vogue was the weekly publication. They made it a bi-weekly publication so that you would get only, Vogue only came out twice a month. That Vogue stayed bi-weekly all the way to 1973. And then in 1973, it became a monthly publication. And I think we'll kind of get to understand why they went monthly as the lecture goes on. But I will say that I think that you start to see that Vogue was losing an audience even in the 70s with the youth. So Condé Nast took over in 1909. And you can see that before, this is the first Vogue cover, and these are the type of illustrations that Vogue would have. And when Condé Nast took over, they had kind of a different vision of how they wanted to sell fashion. And they really wanted it to be seen as art and that it would live in the company of art. So Vogue changed the artwork of the magazine and the covers, and you can tell how different it is. First, there's color. The drawing style is very different. It's way more Art Nouveau. It's very, very artistic rather than illustrated sketches. Vogue wanted fashion to be seen as art and sit alongside art in company. It wanted it to be art, painting, sculpture, drawing, fashion. Vogue wanted fashion to sit within that company, and the covers and everything really start to show that that mindset. What they're selling is still very practical. For example, if you look at our girl here, the traveling girl, at the caption is smart fashions for traveling, where to go and what to take. Obviously, that's going to be practical advice in 1911, but the the cover is very, very artistic. So Vogue is really trying to sort of marry this idea of fashion that is very practical, that we wear, obviously, and it has its purposes, with an idea of it presenting it as art. So a very practical item being presented as an art form and being able to sit within art's company. The first editorial that showed up in Vogue was in the 1910s, like between 1910 and 1920. And the author wrote, "The clothing of a woman is a pleasure for the eye that cannot be judged inferior to other arts." So this is really the focus of Vogue, is that we want fashion to be seen as an art form equal to art, painting, drawing, and sculpture. But remember that Vogue, at the end of the day, needs designers to make their magazine, so they still have to sell products. And so they forecast the seasons. And you can still see that the art form is the same. So we're definitely going to sell a practical product wrapped up as in an artistic method. This is the final word on spring and summer fashions. So this is where Vogue is declaring itself as the final word on what to wear and when to wear it. They really that's very bold, considering they weren't the first fashion magazine. Harper's Bazaar was, but they have surpassed Harper's Bazaar, and they have created this environment for themselves that they are the final word. Not only did they create it, they just printed it and put it on the cover. And then over here, you can see our very, very artistic lady, very influenced by world travel. And she is going to forecast autumn fashions for you. So then you would know what to wear in the fall. And that is 1917 in September. So you would get that, you would go and get your Vogue. It would tell you what to buy in the fall. And then you would go figure out what your fall wardrobe is going to look like. What I found very interesting about Vogue is in 1918, they introduced the idea of journalism to the magazine, and journalistic articles that really dealt with what was going on in the world affairs, what was going on in culture and society, and most importantly, what was happening with women. And you see the cover of May 1918, they really hold tribute to the nurses of World War I. There's nothing about fashion on this cover at all. They really, really recognize women's role in World War I, and that issue was all about the different women in the different countries and how they served the Red Cross. And then, of course, Vogue really takes a stand in 1919, where many of their covers revolve around the suffragette movement and the right for women to vote. And this is June 1919 cover. And you can see that she is in all her white, which is the color of the suffragettes. And you see the American, the French, and the British flag there. And so Vogue is really sending a message about women and this idea of women uniting for this cause and for this right, and that this is a right for women. So this is well past fashion. Vogue is no longer promoting fashion. They are promoting a deeper, meaningful causes for women and what women are really struggling with at this time. And Vogue continues on this path where they're really becoming this voice of women and women's issues. And you see in 1940 where they begin to feature articles, they are beginning to feature articles and photography of women working and women in workwear, not travel fashion or what to wear to the ball, but actually women working and encouraging women to work. Here you see, this is in 1943, take a job, release a man to fight. She is in her office wear, she's ready to go. She's got her pencil. And this is a bold statement by Vogue, telling women, go to work, do your part. And then next door, you can see that these are women in uniform and they're marching behind the American flag. And the caption is calling women. And I think this is bold. This is 1943, July 1943, 6 months before Pearl Harbor will be bombed and America will definitely be at war. Vogue has already called their women to action. No longer is the cover about fashion. It has depth, it's absolutely relatable, and it's exactly what women are dealing with at the time. It's really what is on their mind and their consciousness, and really where society really needs them to embrace these new roles, and Vogue is right there and encouraging it. The other thing I want you to see about it is as we've gone along, the focus has become less European, right? Here in 1919, when Vogue is speaking out for the suffragette, it's a world movement. It's not focused, it's not French. And then here, it's about America, and it's about what American women need to do for their country and their society. And it's not about Europe. And it's a very deep commitment to being American and what it means to be American. And then we begin to see that here is an American sports girl. She's going to go skiing in her fabulous sportswear. Vogue is promoting sportswear. It's on the cover of their fashion magazine, American Sportswear. And this girl is going skiing. And then I love this one next door because this is our college girl. This is August 1943. Our college girl is going off to college and she's in her easy to wear sportswear that's going to be easy for her to take care of. The Vogue is in rainbow to make it light and young and relatable, and it's the college edition. So Vogue absolutely knows that women are going to college and that they are empowered, and they are 100% backing these young girls and encouraging them because they gave them their own edition. College girls, Vogue is really a voice for women and women's issues. It's okay for the women to be out skiing, and she's carrying her own skis, and then this girl's off to college. I just found that fascinating that you see this 20-year gap of Vogue really being deeper than fashion and really about moving women forward and using their voice as a fashion magazine to do it and to empower women in all walks of life and all ages. So the war is over and there's huge prosperity in America. And so Vogue takes a new spin. we really need women to get back into the home because men are home and now there's no jobs for women. So we need to paint this picture that being in the home is really where women need to be. And let's keep them busy by obsessing about beauty. And so maybe that's what they'll focus on instead of all those rights we were just promoting not too long ago. So we really see a return to Europe. If you see this one at the top, Paris Collections Full Report, we're back to European fashion. We are shifting away from empowering women and more towards domestication and surface pursuits. So if we look at these covers, all from different years in the 1950s, one, what it takes to be in fashion this summer, that's what the magazine's about. That's the only article in the magazine. And it's going to be all about the different trends and how to be in fashion. The other one on the bottom I thought was interesting. It was the first time a cover ever had a diet on the front, the skim milk diet, lose 10 pounds. And then it's summer beauty, long view fashion suits, furs, dresses. So you can see that we're getting a lot more surface, a lot more focus on beauty, diet. The talk is Paris, what to wear to be in fashion, and a diet that works, and then of course, beauty secrets. This is really where we see that Vogue is moving away from a voice for women and creating a consumer out of women. So really where you see that they're becoming an arm of the fashion industry for consumerism. And I think that they get more entrenched in the 60s. The 60s, of course, are a huge time in American history. You have the civil rights, you have Vietnam, you have the hippie movement, you have the Black Panther movement. Kennedy was assassinated, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. There was a lot that Vogue could cover, but they didn't cover any of it, not any politics anymore. It's only beauty, fashion, and diet. And if you see here, no longer is Vogue the voice of women and women's concerns. Now it's about beauty, fashion, and diet. It really stays focused on Paris. If you look here, this is Vogue's answer to the hippie. So they kind of decked her out in flowers. So she kind of looked like a flower child. And then it kind of got cut off, but the magazine is going to show you all the latest Paris fashion. The hippies are the counterculture at the time. We learned about them and how important they were and how lasting their fashion has been for us. And this was Vogue's answer to sort of kind of offering their readers the flower child or hippie kind of styling. Here on the bottom, where you see the red Vogue, this was published a couple months after the ERA fight in 1972. So the same year that women are fighting for the ERA, this is one of the covers. And the article is "Beauty is really all about men and it starts with you." The same year women are fighting for the ERA, that's what Vogue is publishing. So to me, we can see that Vogue is getting so far from representing women's issues and what's good for women. I think Vogue is really no longer, at this point, to me, Vogue is no longer a voice for women. It really is a voice for the fashion industry and selling products to women. And so with that, as Vogue is no longer speaking for women, that leaves room for new things to sort of come in and start influencing. And I think in the 60s, you really start to see the influence of movies on fashion. And I put Audrey Hepburn up there from Breakfast at Tiffany's because she is a fashion icon and she is seen that way. And women in the 60s loved her. I mean, we still love her today. The thing that I would say about it is it's still promoting glam. It wasn't, she's still absolutely promoting a very, very done up woman, very glamorous, very thin, very hard to achieve. But it still is a little chink in Vogue's armor there as to a new kind of influence. And it's just going to widen that gap as movies gain more traction. It's just going to widen the gap and give more voices to where influences are coming from. The 70s really sees much of the same, even though in what was going on during the time, you had the gas crisis, Nixon being impeached, you had the hostage crisis, you had all of the cult type religious followings going on. All kinds of things were going on in the 70s politically and culturally, but Vogue stayed the same. Paris fashion, beauty tips, hosting your husband's boss, and diets. That was pretty much the focus of Vogue. And then in the 80s, there's Cindy Crawford there, the famous Vogue supermodel. Vogue kind of starts to really dig in on that same kind of surface idea of fashion, keeping with the beauty, diet, and fashion. But the youth really are searching for more. There's more depth out there. Counterculture, the hippie movement, the Black Panthers, they've already started to sort of, the punks have already started to kind of disrupt what Vogue is saying. And so when MTV launched in the early 80s, that really changed young people's perception of influencing of fashion, because it brought singers into your living room. So Cyndi Lauper, Madonna, Michael Jackson, they were in your living room. The fashion was up close and personal. You could literally pause it, go upstairs and tease your hair, just like Cyndi Lauper's. And there was something imperfect about it. Whereas in Vogue, you know, Cindy Crawford looks perfect. So there was something about the imperfection of these singers in these videos, and they were in your living room, that made it relatable. And it really started to influence fashion for the youth. And MTV, again, chips away at Vogue's influence. And then, of course, teen movies in the 80s. The John Hughes films kind of really influence fashion for the youth. You have Breakfast at Tiffany's, Ferris Bueller, Pretty in Pink, which is I have there. Raleigh Ringwald was sort of the it girl to be. And again, that's chipping away at Vogue's armor. And then, of course, movies really take, and then the movies, the John Hughes movies, the horror slash movies, they all really are starting to really chip away at what Vogue is saying is fashion. And at the time, Vogue was kind of making themselves unrelatable because they were covering runway fashion, European runway fashion, which was not relatable to Americans. And so music and movies and the countercultures that were coming up were, because they spoke to what the people were saying, what their lives were. And in the 90s, you'll see I don't even use Vogue, because these influences have way more influence on fashion and how we perceive fashion and how we relate to fashion than Vogue did by the 90s. By the 90s, sitcoms like Friends and Seinfeld, athletes like Michael Jordan and his relationship to Nike, we've talked about hip hop and grunge, those were all influencing Vogue more, influencing fashion more than Vogue could, to the point where, like we've talked about, Marc Jacobs copied grunge and sent it down the runway. Then Vogue put it in its magazine. So because Vogue really dug in on their idea of fashion comes from Paris, beauty secrets and diet secrets, life was evolving past those things. People had issues, like there were politics and culture at stake that Vogue wasn't addressing. It was it stayed very, very surface to sell goods. But in that sort of like entrenchment, they opened the door for these new influences. And in the 90s, I think is when really Vogue lost most of its ground to TVs and movies, athletes. This is when Nike became fashion. Vogue never put Nike in their magazine. Nike, that's not fashion. But Michael Jordan and consumers said it was. Same with grunge or hip hop, all the different music scenes. And then, so this leads us to the 2000s. And I think Vogue has been completely replaced 100% by Instagram, Pinterest, and different social media sites. I think Instagram and Pinterest are your new fashion magazine. They are portraying people in their in life. They are portraying what people do in life. They're portraying how people wear this fashion for themselves. It's honest, it's relatable, it's today. I think what's funny about it is sometimes it is real people and other times it really is just the company, but it's still the company. It's not an outside magazine who's deciding what they will say is fashion. So like my girl in the buffalo check dress, that's a Free People that I found on Pinterest. So Free People put that up there. But see, if it was Vogue, Vogue would decide, is that dress fashion? Are we going to say that's what you should wear in the fall? And then what are we going to say you wear with it? They would make all those decisions for the company. Whereas now with Pinterest and Instagram, the company can either decide how they want to promote their own product and say, and put it in the atmosphere they want it to be in, on the girl they want it to be on, or it's actually the consumer who is advertising the products they love and wear all the time on themselves. I think that is why it's replacing Vogue, is it's actually honest, relatable, and it's straight to the consumer. Vogue is basically abandoned women's voice in the 1950s. In the 1950s, they really started to focus on a more patriarchal point of view about using fashion and beauty to sort of tell women how to live their lives and what to focus on. And in that, they lost their voice they had established for women. And so by doing that, they've opened the door for new influences. And these new media outlets began to chip away at Vogue's hold on women and the fashion industry. And I think these, and that would have been, you know, TV, movies, music, and now Pinterest and Instagram are really interesting because they really are consumers speaking for themselves or companies speaking directly to the consumer. And so it's really allowed fashion designers to actually get rid of Vogue dominating the voice of fashion and telling you your collection really isn't fashion, or I don't like how you styled it. That's not how we're going to wear it. And it allows the company to find their own consumer on their terms in a more honest approach, I think. Vogue really, in my opinion, from the 1950s on, sort of made fashion surface, a little bit frivolous. They kind of took the depth out of it that we had seen earlier when they were really promoting women's issues with the suffragette and getting women to work during the war. They really sort of abandoned those more deeper meanings to society. And they kind of took fashion as its own entity and kind of floated it above society to where it's not influenced anymore by politics or culture. And it just kind of is its own thing, just kind of floating without being held accountable to what's going on in society. And I actually would say that that is why Vogue has lost its relevance and how it opened itself up to now being pretty much taken over by Instagram and Pinterest, which very much are real people, real people's lives, and their honest look and use of fashion. And so I think that Vogue is going to have a hard time coming back because they would have to go back to where they started, which is really taking on, really being a magazine for women and women's causes, and less about buying, telling women what to buy and what diet to be on. So, any questions before I explain your assignment?
No?
No.
Okay. So for your assignment, you guys are going to create a mood board. And you're going to pick a decade from the beginning of Vogue to the present. And you're going to really look at that decade and figure out what was going on at the time and use the magazine or the trends, and if they stay relevant to the time. So if they speak to the time or if they don't. For example, if you do the 60s, the magazine covers, hint, hint, don't speak to the time. As a historian, you won't be able to look at a Vogue magazine cover from the 60s and understand what was going on in society. What you will understand is that Vogue was trying to be non-political and trying to keep women sort of in this domesticated consumerism point of view. Unlike how Vogue was in, say, 1920, when they're very much outwardly supporting the suffragette movement. Does that make sense? So this is sort of, yours has to be a lot more in depth. This is just kind of a cheat sheet, but this is 1940s. The one girl here in her swimsuit is showing that in the 1940s is when sportswear really took hold, and the idea of sportswear and the American casual lifestyle, and that people, women were out doing things. And so she's there in her beautiful swimsuit with her swim cap on, and she's balancing her red ball. And it's 30 pages for your summer beauty. So basically what to wear to the beach. And then the picture at the top is about being an American and standing united against the war. And then at the bottom is obviously what was going on at the time, which was women needed to get into the factories and get to work because the husbands were being shipped off to war. And so the Vogue cover at the top really reiterated to women that this was the part they needed to play in society at the time. So let me look back at my directions here. Hold on a sec. Oops. All right. So anyways, I can't open it right now, but anyways, you guys would pick your decade, and then you're going to create a mood board based on the trends for that decade and what was going on in society. And I gave you the link to Vogue's archives. So where I got all those different Vogue covers, I gave you the link, and you can go year by year and month by month, publication by publication, and see them all, and what you can read some of the articles in there. And so you can really see what Vogue was promoting, and if it matches what is actually going on in society, or if it's sort of floating above society to keep it kind of light and surface, depending on the decade you guys pick. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you guys have questions, you can always email me as well. But it should, when you read it, it should be kind of straightforward.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I gave you one extra day so that you guys make sure you vote and my assignment doesn't get in the way of voting. Remember, women fought for you to have the right to vote, so use it. Any other questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, well, that is it for today. So let me know if you guys have any questions on your assignments. And other than that, I'll see you guys next Wednesday.
Okay. Thank you.
All right,
Thank
bye.
you. Bye.
Bye. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.